U.S. forces hit targets in southern Iran. They say it was in self-defense and did not violate the ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran. As you heard, Trump seems very reluctant to try and return to war, partly perhaps because he realizes it might not work. Plus, the next set of targets is a little harder to figure out. The 40-day war destroyed much of Iran's military that we can hit. Now military planners have to figure out how they can pressure a regime that does not care about dying. Brigadier General John Teichert, former Air Force combat pilot, former Assistant Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force, Vice Admiral John Fozzie Miller, former U.S. Fifth Fleet Commander. Gents, good to see both of you. General, start with you, although you are not the ranking officer here, as I understand it. If you were providing the president with options for only an air campaign to restart, what are the targets in Iran?
Leland, on day one of Air War College, you talk about using air power in the most effective way, which is something called strategic interdiction, which is striking a regime's sources of power or the things they value most. I'm not talking about the operational targets that we focused on in the first 6 weeks of the war, but I'm talking about regime strongholds or internal security strongholds or power plants or energy sites, those things that have been mapped to the sources of power to the regime, those are the things that I would focus on in this next phase of combat operations if we go there.
Admiral, how is it possible now, after weeks of the Navy having a ceasefire and being able to go through the Strait of Hormuz and sail through it, that there is still an issue of mines and you still have ships that can't get through?
Well, it's possible because what we haven't done during the ceasefire is interdict the small boats that Iran has, the mine layers. We did some of that today. We haven't had a chance to really get it to the shoreline of the Strait of Hormuz and to find those small boats, to find the mines, to find.
How long would that take?
Finding the ones on the ground, I think we probably spent the last couple of months looking very hard at that. And so I think we know where the target set is. Now it's just a matter of getting through the ceasefire and being able to go get after those targets.
So that to you is the next round of targets. That said, is it possible, we know how loath any tanker or ship is to go through when they know they're being targeted, right? It's because of the insurance and everything else, and the mines. Is it possible to clear and open the Strait of Hormuz to the point that you can assure any ship you're not going to get shot at ever?
Well, I don't think ever, but you can give general assurances or good assurances that it's safe. And that's what the maritime community is going to demand. That's what the insurance companies are going to demand. But it's also what Admiral Cooper said he could do when he testified before Congress. He said he could forcefully open up the Strait of Hormuz. That's a lot of work. It's easier for them to close it than it is for us to open it. But we have the combat power to do it. We can get after their command and control, their leadership, their anti-ship cruise missiles, and their drones.
General, you see right now this unwillingness or unease by President Trump to resume an air war. Put the politics aside from it. What does he have to be willing to do? What are the commanders are saying? If you're going to do this in order to bring about some kind of different response by the Iranians, do you have to let us do?
There are two things that I think are holding him back from doing what militarily would be the best thing to do. Number one, he's worried about retaliation from Iran, even more significantly in the Gulf partners than we saw in the first 6 weeks of the war. And I think number two, he's concerned about striking them so hard in such a way that they couldn't reconstitute under a new regime. And I think the president needs to get beyond those two concerns and start using strategic interdiction to actually see an end to this war.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both very much. Admiral Fozzie Miller, General John Teichert.